The Athletic Football Show's Derrik Klassen joining us now on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. Hey, Derrik, how's it going?
I'm doing great this morning. How are you guys?
Fantastic. I was just reading something the other day, and there was an accompanying podcast, Benjamin Solak of ESPN, and he had the most interesting quarterbacks. And I was not shocked to see that Sam Darnold wasn't one of them. However, I do think Sam Darnold is an interesting story heading into this season that maybe because the Seahawks aren't seen as being a major contender isn't being focused on. But, Derrik, I look at Sam Darnold, a starting quarterback for a team that's been mostly successful for the last 13 years, and I go, I have no idea what to expect from this guy. What are you expecting heading into Sam Darnold's first season in Seattle?
Yeah, I mean, you're right that he is a fascinating quarterback, right? Like, because we've seen one-off seasons before, right? And, like, do we think it's going to be the way that 2022 Geno Smith felt, where it's actually something that he can sustain? Or is it going to be something more like, Case Keenum in 2017 with the Vikings? And I probably lean a little bit more towards the Vikings, the Case Keenum Vikings, unfortunately, just because I think, to me, we're coming from Sam Darnold playing in Minnesota, which was arguably one of the best supporting casts that you could possibly play with when it comes to play caller, having the best wide receiver in the league, an offensive line that was not great, but did have a very good tackle duo until Christian Darrisaw went down. Now he's stepping into Seattle, where I think outside of, the tackle duo when they're healthy is definitely a step down in terms of you have more of a mystery at play caller. You don't have a number one receiver quite as good as Jefferson. So I would expect him to come down to earth just a little bit.
Speaking of not having a number one receiver like Jefferson, I went on the morning show and they asked me this question. I thought it'd be perfect for you. Do you think that the receivers here are deep enough and talented enough to help Sam Darnold kind of continue what he did last year?
I think it's deep enough is the right word, because I think they have a lot of guys who are useful. I think we're never going to get the best out of Cooper Kupp again, but I do think that he can still be a useful player, and he still was last year. Obviously, MVS is kind of just a role player as a stretch down the field guy playing outside the numbers. He can kind of eat a lot of the dirty work down the field targets, which I think is useful. And then I do think that Jackson Smith-Njigba is not like a true number one receiver in the way that we think of like A.J. Brown and Justin Jefferson and players like that. But I do think that he can eat over 110 targets pretty consistently and be like a useful player. So I think they have a lot of options. I just struggle to see a top, 15 receiver that can take over a lot of games the way that you see from other top offenses.
Now, Derrik, your job is obviously to take a look at the entirety of the league, and you do a great job for it for The Athletic. But even though we're a Seattle station, we're not homers to the sense that we're like, well, how could you not talk about the Seahawks 24/7? I get it. We get it. We understand. Like, this is a team that has been out of the playoffs more often than not in the past 3 or so years. They've had some turnover at quarterback. They've got a lot of question marks. And frankly, there are just some really fascinating teams, especially fascinating quarterbacks around the league. However, Derrik, if your hand was forced and you had to think about something about the Seahawks where you thought, you know what, I'm genuinely fascinated by this. I'm curious about it. I'll be tuning in for it. What about this team does draw some interest from you?
So in terms of interest, in terms of how much fun am I going to have watching the game, it's Mike Macdonald's defense. I think he's one of the most brilliant play callers in the league right now from a defensive perspective. And so I just continue to, with some of the added talent at pass rush this year, some of the added talent that they brought in the secondary, I think it's going to be a pretty interesting, I think there's a chance that they can be the best defense in the league. And so I'm definitely interested in that. And then on the flip side with the offense, I think there's just such a huge question mark about how good Clint Kubiak is. Because obviously, hot start in New Orleans last year with those first couple of weeks, and then 8,000 injuries just kind of took away their ability to call a good offense in New Orleans. So I'm just kind of curious, is Clint Kubiak more of just kind of a baseline Shanahan, style play caller, the way that we saw from like Bobby Sloak a couple of years ago? Or is he really one of those guys who can elevate the offense? So I'm definitely going to be tuning in for that.
I was looking at all the moves that have been made in the NFL when it comes to coordinators, right? And I guess you can count the head coaches too, like Kellen Moore, whatnot. But Jacksonville has a new coordinator. The Raiders do. The Jets have a new DC. Which coordinator do you feel like can have the biggest impact at their new destination? Or maybe if they've been promoted to the spot.
To me, it's probably Liam Cohen with the Jaguars. And I say that in part because for a while now, I've been a pretty big Trevor Lawrence supporter, and I still think he's better than people give him credit for. I think we're just a little bit too quick to guys who go first overall be upset that they're not the best player in the league, and I think that some of that has gone on with Trevor Lawrence. But I think bringing in Liam Cohen there, obviously drafting Travis Hunter, I think there's a real chance that we start to see something closer to the Trevor Lawrence that we got in that comeback against the Chargers in the playoff game a couple of years ago, right? Like, I think we can get that player more consistently if Liam Cohen is as good as we think that he is.
Heading back to your last comment when you said, I think Mike Macdonald's one of the most brilliant play callers defensively, maybe the Seahawks could be the best defense in the league. What makes Mike Macdonald brilliant to you?
Mike Macdonald has a pretty rare ability to... It just feels like they are never in the wrong call. And that's kind of a hard thing to quantify, right? But like you watch other defenses and every now and then you just feel like, man, they shouldn't have blitzed there. Man, they really shouldn't have ran man there. It feels like Mike Macdonald does the opposite, where you watch a lot of their calls and it's just like, man, the way that they're sending this, simulated pressure where they're dropping a guy off, it just all feels like they have the right answers at the right time. And there are very few defensive coordinators where it feels like they are on the front foot against the offense, and Mike Macdonald to me is one of those guys. So I would just say I think he teaches the secondary very well, and then he brings his pressures in a way that is very smart to me.
I think our expectation is that the defense kind of does lead the charge over here. When you look at the personnel, is there a specific player or maybe group that you're most excited to see perform this year?
This defensive tackle unit might be insane. I mean, Leonard Williams last year obviously was one of the best defensive tackles in the league. Like, he played at truly an all-pro level, which is, we saw flashes early in his career, but it's not something that he had done very recently. So I think he's insane. And then I think there's a chance that Byron Murphy really takes a step and is, something similar to what Mike Macdonald actually had with Justin Madubuike in Baltimore. So there are obviously some other good players on the defense, like Devin Witherspoon is great. Ernest Jones at linebacker is great, but I really think that defensive tackle room, if this is the best defense in the league, it's going to be because of those guys.
Obviously, the Seahawks were on the outside looking in when it comes to the playoffs. Despite being a 10-win team, they did it to themselves, obviously. But I think there's a lot of hope in Seattle. You look at last year's playoff teams and you go, okay, I don't know if Seattle can take a massive step forward, but who's going to have a hard time repeating this success? Derrik, if you were to look at last year's NFC playoff picture, is there a team within that group that you think, you know what, they're going to have to really put in the work to repeat the success that they had last season?
It's the easy answer, but it's got to be Minnesota, right? I mean, just in terms of the quarterback situation where they are going from, obviously they got more out of Sam Darnold than they thought they were going to get last year and still won 14 games or whatever it is. But I think there are bigger questions with J.J. McCarthy. With at least Sam Darnold, there have been flashes of good play before, right? Whereas now with McCarthy, we're talking about a guy who didn't really get his rookie season, obviously, was already a player coming into a league that I thought was going to take a little bit of development time, and he never really got that. And now he's coming off of having torn his knee a little bit. I just think there are so many questions about the McCarthy thing that I would be shocked if Minnesota is as good as they were last year.
Last year's draft class in 2024 was crazy, right? You got Caleb, you got Jaden, you got Penix, you got Bo. I'm sure I'm missing a couple guys. This year, it's a bit different. It's Cam Ward, and then honestly, it sounds like it's going to be Shuck in New Orleans who's going to get the start as well. What are your thoughts about this draft class, and who do you feel like can excel? I guess I can throw in Shedeur and Gabe over there with Cleveland too.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a different experience than last year. That's for sure. Last year we had, even for as many guys went in the first round, I was shocked as many of them were good as rookies as they were. To have 5 good rookies is just kind of insane. This year, I kind of only expect it to be Cam Ward. He's the only guy who I think is going to be the week 1 starter. And he was a guy that I liked. I think coming into the draft class, some people talked about, Ward is a decent prospect, but he's, maybe not to the level of the 6 guys who went first round in 2024. But I liked him better than, J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix and Bo Nix and guys like that. So I think he's going to have a nice impact in Tennessee. We'll see about Shedeur Sanders. I don't even know if he's going to win that starting job. Trying to figure out who's going to win that starting job and for how long is honestly not an exercise any of us should be even trying to get into. And then with Jackson Dart, he was a player I struggled with a lot just because I think players coming out of that Lane Kiffin offense, I think it's going to take a very long time for those guys to acclimate. But New York is in a weird spot where they kind of need him to play now. So I'm very dubious about how that's going to go.
Kind of a weird question here, Derrik. Again, we're speaking with Derrik Klassen of the Athletic Football Show. I think that working in sports means obviously that you've got to be passionate about sports. And sometimes that passion goes towards topics that we could talk about endlessly and maybe other people get tired of. For instance, Derrik, one topic that our producer Curtis and I half jokingly and half seriously talk about regularly is like Jimmy Graham is quietly the best Seahawks tight end ever. Gets a lot of hate here in the city, but like I could talk at length for days about this team's like usage of tight ends or lack thereof, and like the just endlessly about that topic. I don't, because it's just not going to resonate with a lot of people. But do you have like a guilty pleasure topic where you're like, maybe it came up last year, maybe it's something about a player or a team where you're like, I cannot stop talking about this because it's so endlessly fascinating or infuriating to you?
A weird one that I get hung up on a lot, it's not necessarily NFL specific, but the fact that in college the referees stand in the middle of the field is something that I swear every time we get to draft season, I start watching film in like
get riled up
January,
again.
and I'm like, dude, yeah, and I'm like, why is this guy here? He's just getting in the way, and he's a weapon for the offense, and it's just, it's so ridiculous. So that is honestly probably my one that I'll just go back to no matter what.
Bump, has a ref ever been in the way when you were on the field?
Of course. I'm played in the slot. I'm like,
you move.
I'm trying to sit over the ball right now, man. You're all up in my way. Is there a team this year that you feel like is going to make the biggest jump, right? Because last year, I guess someone out there probably claimed that the Commanders are going to have the year that they had. Not too many people, right? But is there a team that we should be looking out for that you feel like is going to make a nice run?
Yeah, not to that degree. Like, obviously, going from one of the worst teams in the league to winning 12 games is insane. But I won't be surprised if by, week 14, 15, we're looking at, they start throwing up the in the hunt graphics and all the playoff stuff. If the Titans are in there, I really like a lot of what they've done. I think J.C. Latham moving back to the right side is going to be huge. I think he can be a superstar tackle. I was just talking about how much I really like Cam Ward and think that he's a good player. And then their defense, I think, is a really underrated unit right now. Like, they have one of the best defensive tackle pairings in the league with Jeffrey Simmons and Tavondre Sweat. I really think their secondary is coached incredibly well. Like, it's called really well, too. From a defensive play calling standpoint. So they're a team where I really think if Cam Ward hits anything, above the average for what like rookie quarterback play is, I really think that they could be a team that could be pretty scrappy, especially in a weird and wonky AFC South.
Who in the NFC West, in your mind, has the best window right now? Either the biggest window or just the best opportunity?
Oh, that's a great question. For this year, I would say if we're just living in the world where everything goes right for all of these teams, I think it's probably the Rams. Stafford, I think, to me, is still the best quarterback in the division. And then if things go right for that defense and the secondary plays a little bit better and the run defense is a little bit better with them bringing in Poona Ford, I do think that there's a chance that pass rushing front can be a really special unit. So I would say right now, until Stafford retires, I would still say the Rams are the scariest team in the division to me.
All right. He is the Athletic Football Show's Derrik Klassen, kind enough to join us for a look at not just the Seahawks, but the rest of the league. Thanks, Derrik. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Derrik.
Thank you so much for having me.